Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
Let me begin by asking you what you concluded when you said, as you left the Supreme Court last year, you said, I found myself pondering, did I achieve everything I set out to do? What is your own answer to that question?
A lot of answers would await posterity, I guess. But speaking for myself, I had laid out a plan for the time that I would be Chief Justice. The first was, of course, in terms of the judgments which I would deliver, because a Chief Justice is first and foremost a judge. And then second, you're also the administrative head of the Indian judiciary. So I first and foremost wanted to, in my judgments, realize the full transformative potential of the Constitution, which I do believe we tried to do.
I mean, you've alluded in that answer to the enormous responsibility you had. I mean, I can't think of a job in the world that has more legal weight behind it than being Chief Justice of India, with 1.4 billion people affected by the decisions that your highest court in the land makes.
And also in terms just of the diversity of cases that we handle. We've broadened access to justice over the last 75 years. So any individual citizen can come to court, and then you're dealing with ordinary cases in appeal as well. We are also the final court of appeal. But apart from being a final court of appeal, we are the final constitutional court.
You talk about your desire to see the court the most accessible, the most transparent in the world. It is interesting to me that you took the decision to live stream online the proceedings of the Supreme Court, which in many parts of the world just does not happen. But I just wonder whether that's something of a gimmick. The truth is that the law in India is still presided upon, adjudicated by an elite of male, Hindu, upper caste men like yourself. And indeed, your own father was Chief Justice of India before you. Isn't there a problem there? It's dynastic.
Well, no, it isn't. Now, what happens is this: if you look at the lowest levels of recruitment to the Indian judiciary, the district judiciary, which is the base of the pyramid, over 50% of the new recruits coming into our states are women. There are states in which the recruitment of women goes up to 60 or 70%. Now, what happens really is this: the higher judiciary today is reflective of the status of the legal profession, say about 20 years ago. Now, I joined the bench in 2000, so I'd spent 25 years before I retired. What's happening now is that as the reach of education, particularly legal education, has reached out to women, that gender balance which you find in law schools is now reflected in the lowest levels of the Indian judiciary. So insofar as the gender balance is concerned, you find an increasing amount of women coming into the district judiciary. And these are the women who would now be climbing up. When you mentioned about, the role of dynasty, it doesn't work like that. By the way, my father had said that I will not enter a court of law so long as he was Chief Justice of India. And that was why I spent 3 years at Harvard Law School doing my studies. Second, I entered a court for the first time after he retired. Third, if you look at the overall profile of the Indian judiciary, most of the lawyers and judges, I say lawyers because they are the people who become judges, as well as the district judges who get promoted. Most of them are first-time entrants into the legal profession. So quite contrary to what you said, it's not that our judiciary is either upper caste or that it is male, in the sense, in the higher echelons of the judiciary. The movement of women to more responsible positions is just about taking place.
Right now, I want to turn to politics. Let me quote to you an editorial in the New York Times from 2023, which is, of course, when you were still Chief Justice. You were 7 years at that point into your stint on the Supreme Court. This is what the newspaper said. Analysts, diplomats and political opponents agree that Narendra Modi's party in India has leaned on the courts to protect its own, target its rivals, as Modi has pushed India's layered, vociferous democracy closer toward a one-party state. Did you, as Supreme Court Chief Justice, have to deal with that growing political pressure?
I think that the New York Times is completely wrong because they were not able to anticipate what would happen in the elections which took place in 2024, which, if at all, completely debunks the myth that we are moving towards a one-party state. If you look at the states in India, the states are where the regional aspirations and identities have come to the fore. And in so many of our states in India, you have regional political parties which have done exceptionally well, and they are ruling those states. So you have this wide dispersal
I'm not
of political
talking about
power.
democratic election results. I'm talking about the relationship between politics and the judiciary. And if one looks even at some symbolic moments, like the moment in 2023 when a high court in Gujarat essentially upheld a conviction of opposition leader Rahul Gandhi on a charge of defamation, which at that time meant that he could not serve as an MP, couldn't stand for re-election. Now, you in the Supreme Court put a stay on that decision, but surely that decision of itself tells us there is a problem in India with the courts being used for political purposes.
No, it actually looks at what end of the spectrum you're looking at. If you look at the fact that, well, there is a decision of a trial court in India, but that judgment of the trial court was stayed by the Supreme Court, which meant that the political leader in question that you're talking about could resume his activities in Parliament.
It's a suspension of the decision, but the defamation cases, and there are at least two, I think, against Rahul Gandhi, go on. And it's, in a sense, a symptom of something much wider, that civil society activists, journalists, opposition politicians are all finding themselves in courtrooms which appear to be intent on bending to the will of Narendra Modi's party.
No, it's to the contrary. If you look at the number of people who have been granted their liberty, who have been granted bail, again, I'll give you statistics because nothing as correct as statistics. Now, last year, 21,000 bail applications were filed in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court disposed of 21,300 bail applications. I'm not going to name the political leaders who have been granted bail by the Supreme Court, but this just is an indicator that due process of law, the rule of law, does govern. Now, in any legal system, whether it's in the UK, it's in the US, it's Australia or India, there's a legal process which is to be followed. But if at all, the higher courts, particularly the Supreme Court, have sent out a clear message that we are here to safeguard personal liberties. Now, in individual cases, there may be a difference of opinion as to whether a court correctly decided a particular case or didn't correctly decide a particular case. Again, there are remedies for that. But the fact of the matter is that the Supreme Court of India has been at the vanguard of personal liberty. And I dare say that this is the reason why, we have so much of the faith of our people.
Let's now talk about some key issues which you had to deal with as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Let's start with the abrogation of Article 370, which was the part of the Constitution which guaranteed the special status, the autonomy of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now, that had been put in place at the very inception of the modern state of India. You agreed that the government had a right to abrogate Article 370. Many legal scholars were deeply disappointed with your decision because they felt that you had failed to uphold the Constitution. Explain to me why you took the decision you did.
Well, Stephen, at the outset, I must tell you that since I was the author of one of the judgments in the case, a judge, by their very nature of the profession, has some restraints on either defending or critiquing their judgments. But I'll briefly answer your question, notwithstanding my caveat, which is this, that Article 370 of the Constitution, when it was introduced into the Constitution at the birth of the Constitution, was part of a chapter which is titled Transitional Arrangements or Transitional Provisions. It was later renamed as Temporary and Transitional Provisions. And therefore, at the birth of the Constitution, the assumption was this, that what was transitional would have to fade away and have to merge with the overall text, the context of the Constitution. Now, is 75 plus years too less for abrogating a transitional provision? So
if I may interrupt, it's not just about the abrogation, it's also about the wider decision you took, which in essence was to demote Jammu and Kashmir from the status of a state to what's called a federal union territory. You even robbed Jammu and Kashmir of its status as a state, and you put no deadline on when that status should be restored.
Stephen, look at it dispassionately. We said that what was intended to be a transitional provision, if the government which is accountable to the people, an elected government, takes the view at the center that we are abrogating what was essentially a transitional provision, that's fine. Second, and that's very critical, the Supreme Court said, can I just have a moment to answer this? The Supreme Court said that the democratic process in Jammu and Kashmir must be restored, effectively setting a timeline for that.
You didn't set a timeline.
We did. Yes, we did. We did set a timeline for the restoration of the democratic process. We set the timeline of 30th September. Elections took place early in October, and a democratically elected government is in place in Jammu and Kashmir.
Yes, but the point is it's a democratically elected government which doesn't have the status of a state.
All right, I'll come to that in a moment, but let's go step by step.
No, if I may, because we've got a lot to get through and all of this is complicated. I just want you to address the criticism that came, for example...
But you'll have to give me an opportunity to answer the criticism as well.
I just wonder what difference it makes to you when you hear well-known civil rights lawyers like Prashant Bhushan say the Supreme Court's decision was, quote, an act of capitulation. The court signaled that it is willing to accept a naked power grab by the federal government.
That's a perception of one lawyer. Let me give you the perspective.
Well, with respect, there's many lawyers I could quote. Let me quote you Dushyant Dave, for example, former president of the Supreme Court Bar Association, who said this decision about Article 370 was one of many decisions in which Chief Justice Chandrachud not only failed, but didn't even attempt to succeed in terms of combating majoritarian power.
Again, completely wrong. Again, completely wrong for the reason that after our decision, which laid down a time frame for holding elections, you have a democratically elected government in place. And there's been a peaceful transfer of power to a government which is of a political party and a political dispensation, which is not the dispensation in the union government in Delhi. So this itself is a clear indicator that democracy has succeeded in Jammu and Kashmir. Second, about the fact that they had converted the status of the state of Jammu and Kashmir into 3 union territories, the Union Territory of Ladakh, Jammu and Kashmir. We have again accepted the undertaking of the union government. We asked them, would you like us to issue a direction, or are you going to give an undertaking? The Solicitor General sought time, he sought an adjournment, he consulted the government at the highest level and has made an unconditional statement before the court that the status of Jammu and Kashmir as a state would be restored as soon as possible.
Yeah, with no timeline. That was my point. No timeline. But let's move on to a couple of other important issues.
But you see, therefore, that the Supreme Court, in that sense, we have ensured democratic accountability. We've ensured that a people's government is in place. And I therefore think, the criticism that we didn't apply our constitutional mandate is not correct. Maybe there are 2 people on one end of the spectrum who have this view. You will have other people who have another different view.
A different issue, but also very important, the 2019 Citizenship Amendment Act, which the Supreme Court chose not to intervene over or to change or modify or demand that the government rethink. To many legal observers, it challenges a fundamental principle that in India, under your constitution, all citizens are treated equally, irrespective of their religion, because this particular citizenship law gives a different sort of privilege on the pathway to citizenship for those from neighboring countries who come to India who are not Muslim. Muslims do not enjoy the same privileges. How is that squaring with the principles underpinning your constitution?
There again, Stephen, your assessment that, our court has allowed the amendment to pass through is incorrect because the case is pending before the court. There's a presumption
Shouldn't you have dealt with it with great urgency? Because the Muslim population of this country regards it as a fundamental signal that they are second-class citizens.
Let's be clear about constitutional principles. There's a presumption of the constitutionality of a statute. If this were to take place in the UK, the court would have no power to invalidate it. In India, we have the power to invalidate legislation which courts across democratically...
And you've chosen, in this case, not to deploy it.
The case is still pending. Now...
That's my point. This is, for Muslim people in India, of the utmost importance.
Stephen,
and yet you tell me, well, we'll consider it when the time is right.
No, Stephen, we have important... I mean, I wrote about 62 judgments for the Constitution bench through my tenure. Now, the fact of the matter is this. We had constitutional cases which were pending for 20 years, dealing with critical issues of federalism, which we have dealt with, giving more power to the states. We dealt with, for instance, you talked about Muslims. We dealt with the issue as to whether the Aligarh Muslim University should have minority status. We reversed a judgment which was written by the Supreme Court in 1968. Now, the question is this, and that's the question where you have to draw a balance. Do you take up new cases at the cost of old cases? If you do that, you'll be criticized that, well, this Chief Justice is assigning priority to new cases when you have old cases which are pending. Or do you also deal with the seminal old cases? I took up lots of old cases, yet combined it with some of the new cases as well. And this case will be dealt with in its due course by my court, my successor.
Justice Chandrachud, I do not doubt that these are difficult issues, and I also know that you are known as a man who worked very, very hard, issued more rulings than almost any other judge that's been on the court. I understand that. One more key judgment that you were involved in that I need to discuss, that is your decision to give a green light to the building of a Hindu temple in Ayodhya on what was the rubble, the remains of a mosque that was destroyed in 1992. Now, the decision you took, again, resonated throughout the country. You said at the time that you had asked God for a solution to this mosque, temple dispute.
That's completely erroneous.
Well, the quote is, I sat before the deity and told him I needed to find a solution.
It's completely incorrect. That's incorrect. That's what has been said in a part of the social media. And let me clarify, I've clarified this again before, that is completely incorrect. It's completely incorrect.
So you didn't pray? See, the Muslims, again, because you are Hindu, this seemed to be an exclusionary act where you were saying, in essence, that you sought religious guidance as a Hindu to decide what to do in a court of law.
Stephen, if you look at social media and try and derive what was said by a judge from social media, you'll get the wrong answers. What I said was this, I was asked specifically, I make no bones of the fact that I'm a man of faith. Our Constitution does not require you to be an atheist, to be an independent judge. And I value my faith. But what my faith teaches me is the universality of religion. And irrespective of who comes to my court, and I dare say that applies to other judges in the Supreme Court as well, irrespective of who comes to you as a litigant, you dispense equal and even-handed justice. And therefore, what I said was this, that it's my faith. Judicial creativity is not just about intellectual ability and skill. It's also about perception. And we work in areas of conflict. We work in areas of intense conflict. Now, within that area of conflict, how do you find a sense of calm, of equanimity? Different judges have different ways to approach that need for calm and equanimity. For me, my time in meditation, in prayer, is very important. But my time in meditation and prayer teaches me to be even-handed to every religious group and community in the country.
Do you think it was a mistake that last year there was a huge furore in this country because a video went viral showing you with Prime Minister Modi at your home, so I suspect it was here in this house, during a Hindu religious festival. Some said, and I'm quoting here from those who criticized you, a clear message sent that the Chief Justice is close to the PM. Was it a mistake?
Let's not make too much out of elementary courtesies of constitutional office. I think our system is mature enough to understand that elementary courtesies which are observed between high constitutional functionaries have nothing to do with the way they disposed of cases. Now, give me a moment, before this particular meeting, we delivered judgments like the electoral bonds case, where we invalidated the law which was brought in by the government for electoral funding through electoral through anonymous electoral bonds. After that, we have delivered numerous judgments which have gone in against the government.
So you think you have effectively stood up to the power of the executive over the last 8 years?
Well, of course, I'm sure, and not me, just individually. See, the court is not just one Chief Justice.
I understand.
It comprises of a collectivity of people. Even the cases which I decided, you discussed the outcomes with your colleagues on the bench, and I do believe that our court has stood up. Well, there's one thing which I have said before, and I'd like to again say, the role of the judiciary in a democratic society is not the role of the opposition in parliament. We are here to decide cases
and to defend the Constitution.
Defend the Constitution and act in accordance with the rule of law.
In this interview, we've talked about the enormous pressures that you faced as Chief Justice, pressures that came with Indian politics, that came with religious tensions in this country, and that came with gender issues in this country. As a final question, you have said, since retiring, that you have a great confidence in the stability of India, the inclusivity of India, and the durability of Indian democracy. Are you sure that confidence isn't complacency?
Well, I'm confident about it for the simple reason that over 75 years of our history, the trials and tribulations of a modern nation, of a new nation, our nation has emerged as a mature democracy. The last elections and consistent patterns of elections across the states only go to remind you that Indian democracy is stable. You know, when the Constitution was born, we were one of the first modern democracies to give the right to vote to every citizen, irrespective of gender, property, class, or education. And at that point of time, a fear was expressed, were Indians ready for democracy? 75 years of our history have only reminded us that Indian democracy is sound, and the electorate is extraordinarily discerning. Second, and that's very important, I believe the way the country's growth path has progressed, economic growth can take place in stable political conditions in a democracy. And the onward path of India as an economic powerhouse is grounded in strong political traditions. Traditions which are safeguarded by all parties in parliament, all parties across our states, and of course by a vibrant electorate.
And ultimately, a constitution.
A constitution, and a constitution which is enforced by independent courts, governed by the rule of law.
And there we must leave it. But Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud, thank you very much for joining me on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me.